The night sky was once again alive with fire and thunder as explosions echoed across the Russian border regions. Ukraine had launched a massive wave of drone attacks that lit up the horizon and shook the ground for miles. It was just before midnight when residents in Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kursk woke to the sound of anti-aircraft guns firing into the darkness. Trails of light streaked through the sky as Russian air defenses tried desperately to intercept the incoming swarm. The world watched in awe and concern as the conflict between Ukraine and Russia entered another volatile phase. The war, which many had hoped would fade into negotiation, instead burned even brighter. This new escalation symbolized not only Ukraine's defiance but also its evolution in the way it fights back against a larger, heavily armed opponent. From the outside, the attack appeared to be a carefully coordinated display of technological warfare. Ukraine's drone strategy had matured significantly, and this latest strike was proof of its growing capability. Each drone was programmed for precision, launched in timed waves to overwhelm radar coverage and confuse Russian defenses. The air glowed with flares and fireballs as explosions erupted near energy facilities and supply depots deep inside Russian territory. Witnesses described seeing drones flying low over fields and villages, cutting through the night like shadows with wings. Russia's Ministry of Defense claimed it had intercepted most of the drones, but local footage told another story. Several key sites were burning, and emergency teams worked through the night to contain fires and rescue civilians from damaged buildings. The exterior of the conflict was brutal, fast, and mechanical, a vivid reminder that the tools of modern war no longer need pilots to deliver destruction. Beneath that fiery surface, however, the real story lay in the human hearts caught between the machines. Inside Ukraine, the attack was celebrated as an act of resistance. For many citizens, it was a message that Ukraine would not remain silent in the face of relentless missile barrages from across the border. It was a statement that the country still possessed the means and willpower to strike back. Yet beneath the pride was fatigue. Families who had endured years of air raid sirens and blackouts felt the endless tension of living through another night of retaliation. In small towns, people gathered around radios and phones, waiting for news about the outcome of the offensive, wondering if it would bring them closer to peace or further into chaos. In Russia, the mood was a mirror image. Residents in Belgorod filmed the explosions from apartment balconies, their voices trembling as they realized the war they once watched from afar had arrived at their doorstep. Parents carried their children to basements while the sound of air defense cannons rattled through the city. The invisible boundary between safety and conflict had vanished. The performance of the operation was both astonishing and alarming. Ukrainian drones flew deep into Russian territory, some traveling hundreds of kilometers before hitting their targets. These machines, built with parts sourced from around the world and assembled in secret facilities across Ukraine, represented the ingenuity of a nation fighting against overwhelming odds. Analysts noted that the attack demonstrated improved coordination, longer range, and better accuracy compared to previous attempts. The drones moved in synchronized formations, confusing radar systems and forcing Russia to stretch its defenses thin. Russian anti-air systems like the S-400 and Pantsir S-1 were active throughout the night, sending volleys of missiles into the sky. But for every drone destroyed, others slipped through, proving that even one of the world's most heavily defended nations was vulnerable to small, inexpensive aircraft operated by determined adversaries. The operation's performance revealed a shift in the balance of technology. Precision, speed, and intelligence had become more valuable than size or firepower. The war's safety mechanisms were constantly evolving. For Ukraine, safety was found in movement and secrecy. Drone teams operated from hidden fields, forests, and abandoned industrial sites, constantly relocating to avoid being targeted. Their command systems relied on encrypted channels and independent control networks, ensuring that if one unit was compromised, the others could continue the mission. For Russia, safety came in the form of layered defenses. Radar stations scanned the skies around the clock, and electronic jammers filled the airwaves with interference to mislead incoming drones. In Moscow and other major cities, cages and nets were installed over sensitive buildings to prevent direct impacts. Despite these measures, the attacks showed that no system was foolproof. The rapid pace of technological development outstripped the ability to defend against it. In modern warfare, safety was no longer a guarantee but a temporary illusion. The conflict had evolved into a constant cycle of adaptation, each side learning, reacting, and improving faster than the other. What made this offensive uniquely significant were the innovations driving it. Ukraine's drone warfare had developed into a form of art under pressure. Each strike was not just about destruction but about demonstrating adaptability and resilience. Using commercial parts, 3D printed components, and software designed by civilian engineers, Ukraine created weapons that could challenge a superpower's defense network. The psychological impact of the drones was just as powerful as their physical damage. The persistent buzzing in the sky created fear and confusion, forcing Russian forces to stay on high alert throughout the night. The cost-effectiveness of the attacks also stood out. While Russia launched multi-million-dollar missiles, Ukraine managed to achieve similar levels of disruption using drones worth only a fraction of that cost. The strategic depth of the operation was another remarkable aspect. By reaching far into Russian territory, Ukraine forced its enemy to fight on multiple fronts, stretching resources that were already under strain. Every successful hit sent a message, not only to Moscow but to the world, that technology and determination could redefine the rules of modern warfare. But every advantage came with a cost. The price of escalation was steep, measured not only in dollars and resources but in human lives and stability. Each drone launched carried the risk of retaliation, and each explosion invited another round of strikes in response. Civilians bore the heaviest burden. Families in border regions lived in constant fear of becoming targets. Children woke up crying in the middle of the night as windows shattered from nearby blasts. The economic cost was equally devastating. Energy infrastructure was repeatedly damaged, leading to power shortages and industrial slowdowns. Both Ukraine and Russia were burning through billions of dollars, diverting funds from education, healthcare, and rebuilding efforts into the relentless machinery of war. The emotional cost, however, could not be measured in currency. The endless cycle of attack and defense had worn down entire populations, leaving behind scars that would take generations to heal. As dawn approached, the fires that had burned through the night began to fade, leaving behind plumes of smoke and silence. The morning light revealed the aftermath: scorched buildings, shattered glass, and craters carved deep into the earth. In some areas, emergency crews worked tirelessly to restore power and clear debris, while others counted their losses. The offensive had once again shifted the dynamics of the conflict. Ukraine had shown that it could reach deeper, strike harder, and disrupt more effectively than before. Russia, in turn, vowed retaliation, promising to respond with overwhelming force. The cycle of escalation seemed endless, a pendulum swinging between aggression and endurance. Yet beneath the chaos, a deeper truth was emerging: the war had transformed into a battle of innovation, willpower, and survival. The global reaction was immediate. Governments condemned the attacks but also acknowledged Ukraine's right to defend itself. Analysts debated whether this latest round of strikes would push both sides toward negotiations or further into confrontation. The use of drones had already changed the nature of warfare, making borders more porous and traditional defenses less reliable. Technology had turned the battlefield into a digital and mechanical chessboard where strategy, intelligence, and adaptability mattered more than sheer power. Observers noted that this conflict had become a laboratory for future wars, showcasing how artificial intelligence, automation, and remote weaponry could redefine combat in the 21st century. For the people living through it, however, there was no time for analysis or strategy. Life continued under the shadow of uncertainty. In Ukraine, families rebuilt shattered homes, soldiers prepared for the next mission, and engineers worked on improving the next generation of drones. In Russia, citizens demanded better protection, and the government tightened security across its borders. The human spirit on both sides persisted, driven by hope, anger, and the will to survive. Each new attack, each new defense, added another chapter to a story that seemed to have no end. As the day ended and night approached once more, the faint hum of engines could again be heard in the distance. The world held its breath, waiting to see if the cycle would repeat. The war had become more than a struggle for territory, it was now a test of endurance, innovation, and human resolve. In the cold calculus of modern conflict, victory was not measured by ground gained or enemies defeated but by the ability to keep fighting, adapting, and surviving. Ukraine's drone attacks on Russian cities were not just military operations, they were symbols of a nation's defiance and a warning to the world that even in the age of technology, war remains deeply human. The escalation had changed the face of warfare forever, leaving behind a landscape of fire, fear, and fragile hope.